classic comic fans. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, creator of the Crime Busters. I'm really excited because today I'm joined by Cici Affini. She's the creator of Mythfall, and she's going to tell us all about her comic and her journey to creating comics. And I'm really excited to hear all about it. I just had a chance to read the first issue of Mythfall, which is currently live on Kickstarter. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So I wanted to lead right up front with the fact that your comic is currently live on Kickstarter. I have done a couple interviews recently where I got so into talking about the backstory of the creators, we forgot to mention that anything about the comic until we were like 20 minutes into it. So why don't we just start off with just the top level, like what is your comic? What's it about? Just so people know, what it is that we're going to be discussing here.
Yeah, so Mythfall is a fantasy epic in space. It answers the question of what if you told a lie that changed the course of history for 5,000 years? And it follows the story of Malcolm Trasmus, who is a diplomat on an alien planet, and what he is discovering. Issue one actually covers like he's just having like a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. So he's just getting like a bad news after bad news. But what he doesn't know is that this bad news that he's been getting, this kind of like bad trend that he's been on, it's being caused by this ancient magical force that has been the source of great calamities during his alien nation's history. And basically he's going to discover that the force he's up against is much bigger than he initially realized.
So as you know, and I mentioned I had just finished reading the first issue. So I am curious with the Kickstarter that you have currently live. Now that's for the single issue, which is I think it was 32 pages long?
I think it's 31.
31.
But yeah, it's somewhere in that range. Yeah.
So I'm curious, going forward, since this really sets up like a big epic, like what your plans are for future issues, just in terms of what people can expect, like how often is it going to come out, if you know that sort of thing, or how long is it going to be. I'm just really curious about your plans for the series.
Yeah. So I've written out basically the first 6-issue arc. And that is like all rising action. And so I should say that this project initially started out as a novel. My background is I've read a lot of like my like sweet spot is like prose fantasy trilogies. So like all my like big writing influences have been these like dense fantasy trilogies. So that's where I initially started with this project. And then 2 or 3 years ago, I experimented with going from prose to like comic script writing, and I really enjoyed that transition. So now we're kind of on this ride, but the scope and the length of it is still very much that initial like 3 500-page prose novels of a story. So I've written a full draft in prose up to the end of what would be book 1, and then I have the outline beyond that, and then written out in a comic script I have issues 1 through 6.
Well, I'm a big fan of that, so that's how I think as well. So like my series Crime Busters, I just finished the Kickstarter for issue 5, and I have it's individual issues are individual stories, but they're starting to build up, and I have an overall storyline that runs through issue 30. So I have like all of that plotted out. So it's a giant epic, and then I have all these future like, oh, that if I live long enough after issue 30, then like the second volume is going to be another 30 issue story that covers this. And so like my characters are in college right now, and I have their arc planned up until they're in their 50s, like hundreds of issues, which will never happen. But I love to like I always think big. I also like came from a background where started reading fantasy novels when I was very young. So that's how I think, like the big scope, the bigger the better for me. So I understand just where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I in middle school I didn't socialize super well. So what I did instead was I would just read the biggest, I would just look for the largest books that I could find and then read them. Now I'm really paying the price for that. I feel like because, in comics, there's a lot of like, this is my 3-issue miniseries, and we finished it, and I was like, oh, that's not going to be me.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing this for a while.
So I'm curious about when you mentioned you had made the transition from writing the prose into writing the comics. I have a couple different questions about that, but I guess let's start with like, what's your background, your experience or with comics? Like, how did you get into comics? What sort of things were your influences in comics?
Yeah, so there are kind of three entry points that I have into comics. The first is actually my dad. He was a real is he is a really big fan of like he grew up reading comics, and so he was a fan of like Superman, Batman, Green Arrow, Green Lantern. He's like a real DC guy. He says he's got comics up in his attic that are like from when he was a kid, but I haven't seen them. I'm very curious about what's up there. But he used to sit with us and watch like Superman shorts when I was really little. And then when I was a little older, we would hang around Saturday mornings and watch Batman the Animated Series together, the Justice League animated series, Superman and stuff. So that's, but I wasn't reading floppies. I was involved in this like comic book superhero like universe, but it was mostly through TV. And then what I was doing in middle school and high school is I was reading a ton of manga, just a lot of manga, everything I could get my hands on. I was a teenager, you like reading manga in the aisles of the bookstore, which nobody liked when you did that. But when I started reading, it was like $20 an issue because it was still like hard to get. So yeah, so I read a lot of manga, and then I also had I saw that you're like a big fan of classic comics. So the classic comics that I read are actually Archie comics. I read a lot of
Hmm.
Archie comics, and I took piano lessons as a kid. And in the waiting room, my piano teacher just had Archie comics all over the place. So while you were waiting, you would flip through. They were bound, I guess. They were perfect bound, so that I don't know that I would call them graphic novels per se, but it was like Reader's Digest and Archie comics. And they were about like the same size and thickness. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so
Well, anyone who's seen any of my stuff or my channel knows that I'm a huge Archie fan. So I have I have hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 probably Archie back issues. I collect Archie, and I draw. My own style is very Archie influenced. I love the Archie stuff. So Archie has a real soft spot for me, and I also found actually that reading Archie stories was very useful in terms of learning comics. Uh, but opposite of my, as I mentioned, I like to do the huge stories. But most Archie things are 6 pages. They have a beginning,
yeah.
middle, end. They have like the 6 panel grid, and they have they have the setup for the joke, and then they have the punchline for the joke. And I remember reading when I first really got into Archie about 12 years ago, reading one of these collections. It was like the best of Archie. It was like 500-page book, and it was just reading all these little 6-page stories. And you really start to get a sense of the how tight the storytelling needs to be to do that. I think the people that crafted those Archie stories are really excellent at the craft of telling comic stories. So I think people tend to overlook a lot of the Archie stuff because it's for kids, or it's simpler in style. But to just learn how to make comics and tell stories, the Archie is really a great entry point for that.
Yeah. And it's like the characters in Archie comics, like you get so little of each one in each individual comic, but as you like read, like as they accumulate into like a it builds like a picture over time of like, you know, 6 panels here and 6 panels here, and then it gives you a bunch of like little data points, and then you have these characters that you've come to know over a long period of time. I think that's an interesting
Yeah.
phenomenon.
I
Yeah.
also think it's really interesting when you mention your manga influences, because one thing I've talked about before in interviews is like one thing I love about Kickstarter is that they besides not having sort of the traditional gatekeeping of making comics that I kind of grew up with when I was, you know, trying to make comics in the 80s and 90s as when I was young, and it was almost impossible to get them printed and distributed. But everybody was also coming, almost everybody was coming from this same sort of superhero comic sort of background. And on Kickstarter, you get this newer, younger, much more diverse demographic of people who have other influences and who are not just telling these same superhero stories that Marvel and DC have been doing for like 40 years straight. And a lot of that, I think, from what I've seen, I see a lot of manga influences. And it's for me, it's a big breath of fresh air to see people that aren't coming from this like classic American superhero center. It's because it allows them to tell different types of stories than what you're going to get at the comic store. So I love that.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was really exciting about reading manga, is that it was so different than like the themes, the types of characters, the types of stories could be really different than what you would get from Western comics and Western animation, especially when it came to genre. There's all kinds of cool stuff happening in genre in manga and anime, particularly when I was reading it in like the late 90s and like first half of the aughts. I mean, they're still doing it, but I think now more of that has kind of seeped over. Like you're getting good genre animation, you're getting more like science fiction, fantasy, Western comics as well. Maybe not like a lot more, but in the 90s, it felt like comics were superheroes. And I'm sure there was still like indie stuff happening, but at my age, I wasn't really exposed. I was like hitting the comic shops. And so it felt like it was like superheroes and then stuff that wasn't from the US. And I think that's a little more blended now. But
Yeah,
at the time, it was like very different.
I feel like manga kind of stepped in with that to fill a gap. When I started reading comics in 1984, um, Marvel and DC were still putting out genre books. So I didn't get into superheroes for a while because all I was reading was science fiction, fantasy, all it was all genre stuff. And even westerns were still coming out, war books. And then within 5 years of me starting to get into comics, almost all of that was gone.
Mm.
You know, all the science fiction stuff that I was reading, most of the fantasy comics that Marvel and DC were doing, they're all gone. It was all superheroes. And I still like, you know, I got into superheroes because that was the only thing to read. But what I really like is the genre stuff, the older stuff, the horror, the romance. I love romance comics. And that's one thing I really like about manga is that they have that stuff still. Like, I feel like it fills a real need in the comics community that readers, particularly at that time, late 90s and aughts, weren't getting from Marvel and DC anymore. And you had to get it from these other places.
Yeah, and I'm not. I recall at that time in the 90s, like not only was it superhero comics, but it was like a very triangular time in superhero comics. Like everyone was like very like all the like male superheroes like very broad, and like all the female superheroes were like very wasp shaped, and like it was like very exaggerated
Yeah.
too. And then it was like also that's all there was.
Yeah. It was a dark time. So the other thing that I wanted to ask about, to go back to you as a writer, I'm curious on just on a technical level as a writer, what the transition was like to adapt the novel into a comic script? Like, what was the learning curve like? What challenges did you have? What did you find that was, better in the script? I'm really curious about that move.
Yeah. So that was a really bracing transition. I think I've described it as like, so like I had studied prose writing for a while because I knew that I wanted to do it for a long time. So like I took writing courses and in school, and I would, like attend, like read books about writing and how to do it well and stuff like that. And there's no like hard rules other than grammar in writing prose, but there are like a lot of guidelines. And so they talk about like this is a good idea to do. It's like good to structure your story this way, and you want to set up your pacing like this, and this is how you know. Then and there's genre specific books as well. I think like Stephen King has one, and there are just ones like specifically about how to write fantasy, and so like there's a lot of very accessible resources to kind of teach yourself what to do. And when you don't know what you're doing or when you're learning what to do, that's really helpful. But what we discovered when, because I'm part of an indie publisher, there's four of us, co-conspirators, I like to call us. And so when we were all looking into getting started doing comics together, we were like, well, like, how do we do comics? And it's very fast and loose. You like when it comes to script writing, you can kind of do, I don't want to say anything, but like there isn't like this is how you format the script and this is how you format the dialogue and this is what each of the panels should be. Like this is kind of very, very loose. So that is almost like a little scary because you're like, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong because there's no like absolute way to be sure that I'm doing it right. So I've described it as like just like leaving all my baggage on the plane and then jumping out is what it felt like. But it was really cool. And I think one of the things that was cool about it is it can be easy to get a little lost in writing prose because there's no length restriction. And the length restriction for the words that appear on the page in the comic is really, really going for prose to comics, like it's, I wouldn't say, yeah, I'll say punishing. Yeah. So like just the amount of words that you can say like on the page is small. So you have to really think a lot about like what your dialogue is and what it needs to do. Almost like writing a poem, like it's so brief. And then you have to think about, okay, all this stuff where I could have just had my character like get lost in thought for like 6 pages and then explain, like all of the economics or world building or and reflect back on the ancient, things in their childhood that they're thinking or whatever. All that stuff like is maybe you get a couple lines of narration, but that's it. So you have to think, how do I get that like on the page visually in front of the reader? Or is it really necessary to talk about this right now? Or you just cut away all the excess and do like only what you can fit.
Yeah, I find like so when I've worked with different artists and we have different sort of workflows, and for some of the reasons you're just saying, I like to work the old school, what they call the Marvel method. I had one artist
Yeah.
I worked with who was okay with it, and so I did a plot breakdown page by page. He came up with the layouts. I gave the thumbs up, and then once I got the finished pages, then I did the dialogue, because I wanted to see what would fit around the artwork. Now I work full script for the artist I'm doing now, but basically, right now I'm just finishing the lettering on issue 5 for Crime Busters, and a lot of times I'll go to my script and I'll copy and paste onto the panel, and I'll be like, well, that's not going to work. I've got to lose half of those words because the way it's drawn, I thought I was going to have this giant space, but there's a dinosaur. So I need to have a tiny word balloon. So I need to have, instead of 30 words in this, I need to have 8. So it's like for me when I'm scripting, the dialogue on the script is just to tell the artist basically what the emotion is about. Because I'm gonna have to rewrite most of that dialogue once I actually get the pages back. It's so yeah, it can really be a challenge, but it's a very it's almost like the page itself is the editor, because you just don't have the space to say all that stuff. You've got to figure out how to say the same thing in half as much space. So one thing you mentioned, I want to circle back to, because I wanted to ask about this. Now you mentioned you're part of a publishing sort of collective. I want to hear more about that. Like, how did that come about? How does it work? Just and I know you've, as a group, you've put out a previous comic, right? But I don't know anything about that. So if you could just tell us all about that, that would be great.
Yeah. So Addict Door Media is our publisher, and it's me and three of my friends, and one of my friends is my husband. And so the four of us are all like people who wanted to write stuff, and we basically all had passion projects. So Incident Report is a slice of life superhero comic, and the premise of it is I like to say what if Shield was competent, but it's basically like in the 1950s, around the time of like when the United Nations was founded, there was a reveal of superheroes. So basically, like superheroes went public, and so a international like three-letter agency was founded to sort of manage superheroes and help them integrate people with powers and people with not powers into society together. And it has three branches. It has like social work, policing, and research. And so that's what the ICA does. Superpower people are called Chimerans. So it's the International Chimeran, let's say, agency, association. And so the ICA basically is a resource for people with powers and society, so that they don't like they integrate together well. And so that happened like a long time ago, and now we're in the present, and this is sort of like the society that we're in. So there's no capes, there's no vigilantes, there's no like masks or secret identities. People with powers exist in society, and they're integrated. So the story follows Anne Harris, who is a social worker and a fire projector, and her job is to like people find out that their 2-year-old can fly and they need help. So Anne comes in and she connects them with resources and stuff like that. But she used to be on the policing side, and one of her old colleagues was murdered in some kind of heist, and now she's kind of getting drawn back in that direction. And so it's this pull of like, which of these is her real calling? And she also has a family, and so like her family life is part of it. And that's the breakdown there. So the other members of Addict Door Media are Mark, Mary, and Brian. And Mary and Brian came up with this concept. It's based on a Champions game that they played, where they made the characters there, and then they had so much fun doing that they took the characters out of there and put them in their own setting. And then Mark is the writer on it, and Mary and Brian considered this as like a TV show, or they actually first considered it as a comic, then thought about it as like a pilot, and then like a novel, and then they came back to comics because they have like a really strong grounding in Marvel, and comics were just like a really good medium for them, and for like what they wanted to talk about. So around 2020-ish, they got together with Mark, and who is like helping them with the writing aspect of it. And then they reached out to me, and Mark said, I think that this like comic thing they were doing would be a really good fit for Mythfall. And that's when I decided to give it a shot as a script, and I found that I really liked it. We're on issue 2 of Incident Report. We finished the Kickstarter for issue 2 last summer, like in August, September. And then we're most of the way through producing issue 3. So that'll be the next thing we do after Mythfall.
Okay, great. Now, do you have any other titles coming out? Is it mainly just going to be these two, or are there's others series that you're going to do as well?
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas. uh, the the name Addict or Media is like the attic is like your mind basically is meant to be, and like the things in the attic are like the stuff that we produce. I know that Mark in particular has a ton of ideas, but we don't have anything fully in production yet. We're like, other than those two, we're kind of like tossing ideas around. I think we want to maybe try something sort of short next, just to maybe see what that's like. So yeah, I think we're gonna try doing that. I know Mark participated in the Not So Fair Tales anthology. He's got a short in that. So I think we're going to try to do some stuff like that too, but nothing definite yet.
Okay, cool. Now I wanted to ask you about your creative team on Mythfall.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that you have a female-led creative team featuring a collection of female and non-binary creators. Was that a conscious choice, or did it just sort of happen like that? And how did you meet the other members of the creative team?
Yeah. So I had a strong feeling. You never know like how things are going to work out, but I was pretty sure that I wanted to work with a female illustrator because I had some ideas about how I wanted the characters to be drawn and portrayed, and like I wanted a lot of body type diversity. I wanted like the women to look a specific way, and you can definitely find male artists who are doing that, but I felt like I would be more, I thought I have a better shot of getting what I wanted with the female illustrator with less explanation. Like I had a feeling like if I found a female illustrator, the chances that they would like just get it were pretty high. Whereas with a, depending on, and you know, in like as a new person, and you know who I was probably going to work with, you know, as an indie person and stuff like that, like they're definitely like male illustrators out there who could do this, but I wasn't sure that I would be able to find one, and one that would work with me, who would be able to get me like what I wanted, when I was pretty sure that yeah, with a female illustrator we'd be on the same page pretty quickly. And then from there and so then from there we built the other team around it, and we were never at like, my goal was always to do what was best for the work. So like if we found a male artist at any point where we were like, well, this is going to be like absolutely the best fit, I would have done that. But I wanted to see if I could do it without without it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I had thought um when I had thought about like what I wanted, I could have gone, it felt sort of like counterproductive to go for like an all female team if that meant excluding non-binary people, because that seemed counterproductive. And then I thought, you know, like if there were people of like other alternate genders, like it seemed like the goal of sort of uplifting people who might not have like more traditional avenues into publishing, that would be counterproductive to like what the mission was. But we ended up having a mixed female and non-binary team, and it's pretty cool to have. And also all the people on the team are really awesome. Like Aaron we left into because Allie, who is my illustrator, was helping me understand what to look for from a colorist, and she lifted up Aaron as like, they're somebody who like, this is like definitely what we're looking for in a colorist. And then we reached out to them just sort of like, I don't know, just in case, and they happened to be available. And we were like, oh my goodness, we don't have to find somebody like Aaron, we can just get Aaron, this is amazing. So that was really exciting. And then Haley Rose Lyon we had worked with before. That's my letterer. That is the letterer. Sorry, that's the letterer for Mythfall, but they were also the letterer for Incident Report, and so we were familiar with their work. And I was like, I know their work is terrific, and I had some like complex needs out of the lettering, maybe a little more complex than might be standard, and I knew that they were going to do great with that, so I was excited to work with them. And then the editor I reached out to separately, that is Barbara Perez Marquez, and she was like Eisner nominated. I found her on Twitter, and yeah, she did a really great job. She helped me add like narration and stuff, and really like bring the best that I could. It was really important for me to have an editor because I was so new to the medium, and I was like, I definitely want to make sure I run this by somebody else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's great. In the same way with Kickstarter, like what you said about there's a lot of people that have not traditionally had a way into comics as a publishing um business, so I think it's great on Kickstarter that it's an avenue for all sorts of disadvantaged people who have been excluded from comics in the past to be able to get into the industry and tell new stories. So I think it's terrific. Um, Before we go, is there anything about your current campaign that you wanted to highlight or talk about?
um, yeah, so right now we're sitting at about 79%. We have some really cool covers. We have our standard cover by Ali. We have a variant cover by Aaron, our colorist. And they're really like killing it out there. They're like working for Critical Role and like DC and stuff. So that cover is really amazing. And then we have two other variant covers, Kaylin Smith and Desiree Guyton. And then we also have a travel poster. So it's done in a WPA style, like National Park poster, like retro style. And we're doing it as a postcard and a metal print. The poster design is by Lori Tan. And it's super cool. So basically, like if you visit the planet, like it'd be like the postcard you picked up from your trip.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love travel posters. I have them all over my house, so that's really cool.
Yeah, I was really excited about the NASA ones they did a while back for like Enceladus and stuff like that. And so
Yeah,
that was
we've got a whole
something.
set of those. So
Yeah, yeah. So I was really excited to make that for this.
yeah. Well, great. I'm going to have all the links down below for everybody to check out the campaign. And I really appreciate you joining me. And I hope everyone does check out the campaign. I'm really interested to see what you have going forward and what Addict Door has going forward as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.